The warm morning sun filtered through the large windows of Sweet Magnolia, casting a golden glow on the polished wooden floors and crisp white tablecloths. Sarah Mitchell, a 35-year-old black woman with bright eyes and a confident smile, stood in the middle of her empty restaurant, taking in the peaceful moment before the day began. 10 years ago, this space had been nothing but an abandoned building in downtown Atlanta. Now, it was one of the city's most talked about restaurants, serving upscale Southern cuisine that made food critics weak in the knees. But for Sarah, Sweet Magnolia was more than just a successful business. It was her grandmother's legacy brought to life. As she walked through the dining room, straightening chairs and adjusting flower arrangements, Sarah's mind drifted to the countless Sunday afternoons she'd spent in her grandmother's kitchen. The old woman's hands had been rough from years of cooking, but they moved with gentle precision as she taught Sarah the secrets of perfect buttermilk biscuits and mouth-watering peach cobbler. "Remember, baby," her grandmother used to say, "good food brings people together, and when people come together with open hearts, wonderful things happen." Sarah smiled at the memory as she made her way to the kitchen. The morning staff was already busy preparing for lunch service. The sound of chopping vegetables and sizzling pans filled the air, mixed with cheerful conversation and occasional laughter. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah called out, and her team responded with warm greetings. Unlike many restaurant owners who stayed in their offices, Sarah believed in being hands-on. She often worked alongside her staff, whether in the kitchen or on the dining room floor. It wasn't just about maintaining quality, it was about building a family. Lisa, one of the newer waitresses, hurried up to her with a worried look. "Miss Mitchell, Marcus called in sick today. We're already short-staffed because of Amy's vacation." Sarah nodded, already removing her blazer. "Don't worry about it. I'll help with the lunch service today." She headed to her office to change into a spare uniform, ignoring Lisa's protests that the owner shouldn't have to wait tables. The truth was, Sarah enjoyed these occasional returns to serving. It kept her connected to every aspect of her business and reminded her of where she started. Before opening Sweet Magnolia, she'd spent years waiting tables at other restaurants, saving money and learning the industry from the ground up. As she changed into the simple black uniform, Sarah glanced at the framed photographs on her office wall. There was one of the restaurant's opening day, another of her graduating from culinary school, and in the center, a faded picture of her grandmother standing proud in front of her own small catering business from the 1960s. That business had supported Sarah's grandmother through decades of racial discrimination and hard times. She catered for wealthy white families who would praise her cooking but wouldn't let her use their front door. Yet she never let bitterness poison her food or her heart. "Kill them with kindness," she always said, "and season everything with love." Sarah straightened her name tag and checked her appearance in the mirror. Her natural hair was neatly styled, her uniform pressed and professional. The lunch crowd would be arriving soon, including a group of corporate executives who had reserved the best table in the house. Little did Sarah know that this ordinary Tuesday was about to become anything but ordinary. As she stepped out of her office, ready to help her staff through the lunch rush, she had no idea that one of those executives would test every lesson her grandmother had taught her about grace under pressure. The host's stand phone rang, and Sarah heard the confirmation of the corporate group's arrival time. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and smiled. Whatever the day might bring, she would face it with the same dignity and determination that had built Sweet Magnolia from the ground up. The first customers were beginning to trickle in. The kitchen was humming with activity, and the delicious smells of Southern cooking filled the air. It was going to be an interesting day at Sweet Magnolia, one that would remind everyone that sometimes the best life lessons come served with a side of humble pie. The lunch rush at Sweet Magnolia was in full swing when the group of corporate executives walked through the door at exactly 12:30 p.m. There were 6 of them, all wearing expensive suits and carrying leather briefcases. Sarah noticed them from across the dining room as she cleared a table, watching as Lisa, the hostess, guided them to their reserved table by the window. "I'll take that table," Sarah told Lisa quietly, seeing how overwhelmed the other servers looked. "You help Jenny with her section." Lisa nodded gratefully, and Sarah grabbed fresh menus from the host's stand. As she approached the table, Sarah put on her warmest professional smile. 5 of the executives returned her greeting with polite nods, but one man, sitting at the head of the table, barely glanced up from his phone. He had gray hair, an expensive watch, and a name she would soon learn was Richard Walsh. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Sweet Magnolia. I'm Sarah, and I'll be taking care of you today, she said, distributing the menus. Can I start you off with some drinks? We'll need your best wines, Walsh said without looking up, his tone dismissive. And make it quick. Some of us have important meetings to get back to. Sarah maintained her smile. Of course, sir. Our wine list is on the back of the menu. We have an excellent selection of. Just bring us whatever's expensive. Walsh cut her off, finally looking up at her. His eyes narrowed slightly, and his lip curled in a way that Sarah had seen too many times before. Assuming you know what that means. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. One of the younger executives, a woman with short blonde hair, shifted in her seat and shot Walsh an uneasy look, but Sarah didn't miss a beat. I'd be happy to bring our sommelier over to discuss options that would best complement your meal, she said smoothly. In the meantime, can I tell you about today's specials? Throughout the next 15 minutes, Walsh made several more subtle but cutting remarks. When Sarah described the crawfish etouffee, he mumbled something about keeping the help in the kitchen where they belong. When she efficiently rattled off the ingredients in their signature dishes, he expressed exaggerated surprise at her extensive vocabulary. Each comment was carefully worded to maintain plausible deniability while making his prejudices clear. Sarah handled each one with practiced grace, though she could feel her neck growing warm with contained frustration. The other customers around them had started to notice. An elderly couple at the next table exchanged disapproving glances. A group of young professionals nearby were whispering and frowning in Walsh's direction. At a corner table, Sarah spotted a familiar face, Jessica Chen, CEO of a major tech company and one of Sweet Magnolia's regular customers. Jessica was watching the scene unfold with intense interest, her lunch companion forgotten as she observed Walsh's behavior. The service here is surprisingly slow, Walsh announced loudly as Sarah returned with their drink orders. I suppose that's what we get for trying a place like this. Should have stuck to our usual spots. I apologize if you feel the service isn't up to standard, Sarah replied calmly, placing his expensive wine in front of him with perfect form. Is there something specific I can improve? Walsh took a sip of wine and made a show of wincing. Well, for starters, you could get someone more qualified to serve us. Surely there's someone else available? The blonde executive gasped softly. Another man at the table suddenly became very interested in his napkin. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah stood straight, her grandmother's words echoing in her mind. Your dignity is not determined by how others treat you, but by how you respond to that treatment. Sir, she said, her voice steady and professional, I assure you that I'm fully qualified to provide you with excellent service. Now, are you ready to order, or do you need a few more minutes with the menu? Walsh's face reddened slightly at her composure. He opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by another patron dropping their fork with a loud clatter. As Sarah turned to look, she saw Jessica Chen carefully dabbing her mouth with her napkin, her phone positioned to capture everything happening at Walsh's table. The stage was set for what would become one of the most memorable lunch services in Sweet Magnolia's history. The situation at Table 7 was getting worse by the minute. As Sarah brought out the appetizers, she could feel every eye in the restaurant following her movements. The friendly lunch atmosphere had turned tense, like the air before a storm. Richard Walsh wasn't done making his opinions known when Sarah placed his crab cakes in front of him, perfectly golden brown and garnished with fresh herbs. He pushed the plate away slightly. I specifically asked for these to be well done, he said, though he had made no such request. I apologize for any misunderstanding, sir, Sarah replied, her voice steady. I'd be happy to have the kitchen prepare a new order to your liking. Don't bother, Walsh said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. I'm sure competence is hard to find in establishments like this. You people usually have other qualities. The blonde executive at his table finally spoke up. Mr. Walsh, I don't think. Angela, please. Walsh cut her off. I'm simply providing constructive feedback. That's allowed, isn't it? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. In the kitchen, Sarah's staff had noticed what was happening. Marcus, one of the line cooks, peeked through the service window with concern. Miss Sarah, he whispered when she came to pick up another order, you don't have to deal with this. Let me get Thomas to take over. Sarah shook her head. thinking of all the times her grandmother had faced similar treatment with unshakable dignity. It's all right, Marcus. Some lessons need to be learned the hard way. Back in the dining room, Jessica Chen was now openly taking notes on her tablet. Sarah noticed her making a phone call, speaking quietly but intensely into her cell phone. At another table, an older black couple who had been regular customers since opening day watched the scene with a mixture of anger and pride at Sarah's composure. Walsh's behavior continued to escalate. When Sarah brought out their main courses, he found fault with everything. The steak was too rare, it wasn't. The vegetables were cold, they were steaming. The presentation was amateur, it was perfect, as always. You know, Walsh said, swirling his third glass of expensive wine, I have connections with the health department. Perhaps they should pay this place a visit. Make sure everything is up to standard. His threat hung in the air like a bad smell. One of his colleagues, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, stood up abruptly. Excuse me, he said, looking embarrassed. I need to make a call. He walked quickly toward the entrance, pulling out his phone. Sarah felt her hands shake slightly as she refilled water glasses, but her voice remained calm. Is there anything else I can get for you, sir? Actually, yes, Walsh said with a smirk. I'd like to speak to the owner. Immediately. The blonde executive, Angela, looked mortified. Mr. Walsh, maybe we should just finish our lunch quietly. No, Walsh insisted. I'm a paying customer, and I have some serious concerns about the quality of service here. Get me the owner. Now. Sarah straightened her spine, remembering her grandmother's words. Sometimes, baby, the best response to hatred is to let it reveal itself completely. Then everyone can see it for what it really is. Of course, sir, Sarah said. I'll get them right away. As she walked toward her office, Sarah caught Lisa's eye and gave her a slight nod. Lisa's worried expression turned to a small smile of understanding. They had dealt with difficult customers before, but this time would be different. In the background, Sarah could hear Walsh continuing his commentary. It's a shame what's happening to this neighborhood, he was saying. These places pop up claiming to be fine dining, but they're just. Sarah reached her office door, where her chef's coat hung pristinely. As she slipped it on over her server's uniform, she took a deep breath. The weight of her grandmother's antique ring on her finger reminded her of all the strong women who had faced moments like this before her. She emerged from her office just as Walsh was demanding to know what was taking so long. The dining room had grown so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Every customer, every staff member, and especially Table 7 was about to get a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. Jessica Chen had been coming to Sweet Magnolia every Tuesday for the past 3 years. As one of Atlanta's most successful tech CEOs, she could eat anywhere she wanted. But there was something special about this place, not just the food, but the warmth and respect that filled every corner of the restaurant. Today, however, that peaceful atmosphere had been shattered by Richard Walsh's behavior. Jessica sat at her usual corner table, her lunch growing cold as she documented everything she was witnessing. As the head of Chen Technologies, she had been considering Walsh's company for a major software contract worth millions. Now, she was seeing exactly who Richard Walsh really was. Are you getting all this? Jessica whispered into her phone to her assistant. I want every comment, every reaction noted. And check if anyone is filming this on their phones. She paused, listening. Yes, especially the part about threatening to call the health department. That's attempted intimidation. Around her, other diners were having similar reactions. A young man in a business suit at the next table was typing rapidly on his laptop. Jessica recognized him as a reporter from the Atlanta Business Journal. 2 tables over, a woman was quietly filming on her phone, her expression a mixture of disgust and disbelief at Walsh's behavior. Jessica watched as Sarah handled each insult with remarkable grace. She had known Sarah was the owner for years. They had become friendly during Jessica's regular visits, often discussing business strategies over dessert. But she had never told anyone about Sarah's position, understanding why the owner sometimes chose to work alongside her staff. Send me everything we have on Walsh's company. Jessica continued on her phone. Board members, major clients, social media presence. And get me Robert from legal on the line after lunch. She ended the call and took a sip of water, her mind racing with possibilities. The executive who had left Walsh's table earlier was now standing near the entrance, having an intense phone conversation. Jessica could read his body language. He was distancing himself from Walsh's behavior, probably calling his own company's HR department. Angela, the blonde executive, tried once again to steer the conversation in a better direction. "The food is actually excellent," she said loudly, taking a bite of her blackened catfish. "My compliments to the chef." "Excellent," Walsh scoffed, pushing his barely touched steak around his plate. "Maybe by certain standards, but I expected better from a place charging these prices." Then again, he glanced dismissively at Sarah as she passed by. "I suppose they have to make up for other deficiencies." Jessica had heard enough. She stood up smoothly, straightened her designer blazer, and walked toward Walsh's table. As she approached, she could see other regular customers watching with interest. They all knew who she was, and more importantly, who Sarah was. "Mr. Walsh," Jessica said clearly, her voice carrying in the quiet restaurant. "I don't believe we've met formally. I'm Jessica Chen, CEO of Chen Technologies." Walsh's face changed instantly. Chen Technologies was a giant in the tech industry, and Jessica knew he had been courting them for months. "Ms. Chen, what a pleasure. I had no idea you dined here. Please join us." "No, thank you," Jessica replied coolly. "I'm actually here for a different reason. You see, I've been observing your behavior today with great interest. As someone who was considering your company for our new security software contract, I find it educational." The color drained from Walsh's face. I don't understand. This is a private business lunch." "Nothing is private when it comes to character, Mr. Walsh," Jessica interrupted. "How someone treats people they think can't fight back tells you everything you need to know about them." She pulled out her business card and placed it on the table. "Your company's representatives can contact mine to cancel our upcoming contract meetings." Walsh started to stammer a response, but Jessica had already turned away, walking back to her table. As she sat down, she saw Sarah emerging from her office, now wearing her chef's coat. Jessica smiled, knowing what was about to happen. Sometimes, she thought, justice arrives wearing a chef's whites and carrying decades of dignity in its stride. The dining room of Sweet Magnolia fell completely silent as Sarah walked toward table 7. Her chef's coat was crisp and white, with executive chef and owner embroidered in elegant script above the pocket. The golden name tag below it read Sarah Mitchell in clear letters. Richard Walsh was still recovering from Jessica Chen's departure when he noticed Sarah approaching. His face showed confusion at first. He was expecting to see the owner after all. The realization didn't hit him immediately. Instead, he frowned at Sarah's changed appearance. "Where's the owner?" he demanded. "I told you to get the owner, not change your uniform." Sarah smiled, the kind of smile that carried generations of strength behind it. "Mr. Walsh, I am the owner of Sweet Magnolia. I'm also the executive chef, and today I chose to help my staff by serving tables during our busy lunch hour." The silence in the restaurant deepened. Someone's fork clattered against a plate. Walsh's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The other executives at his table had various reactions. Angela covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hide a smile. 2 others stared at their plates, faces red with embarrassment. The rest looked at Walsh, waiting to see how he would handle this revelation. That's impossible," Walsh sputtered. "This is an upscale establishment. You can't be." "Can't be what, Mr. Walsh?" Sarah asked calmly. "Can't be the owner? Can't be the chef? Can't be qualified? Please, finish your thought." Walsh's face turned from red to purple. He looked around the restaurant, perhaps finally noticing how many people were watching. His eyes landed on Jessica Chen, who raised her water glass to him with a cold smile. "This is some kind of joke," he said, his voice weaker now. "You're just pretending to be the owner to cover up your poor service." Sarah reached into her chef's coat pocket and pulled out her business card holder. Made of soft leather, it had been a gift from her grandmother when she first opened Sweet Magnolia. She placed a card on the table in front of Walsh. "My credentials, Mr. Walsh. Bachelor's degree in culinary arts from Johnson and Wales University. 10 years of experience in 5-star restaurants. Winner of the Southern Chef of the Year award 3 years running. And yes, owner of Sweet Magnolia, voted Atlanta's best new restaurant last year." The young reporter from the Atlanta Business Journal was typing faster than ever. Several phones were discreetly recording the scene. Walsh picked up the business card with trembling fingers. I believe, Sarah continued, her voice clear and strong, you had some concerns about our establishment that you wanted to discuss with the owner. I'm all ears. Walsh looked desperately at his colleagues for support, but found none. Angela was already gathering her things. Mr. Walsh, she said, standing up, I believe this lunch meeting is over. And, she turned to Sarah, I apologize for not speaking up sooner. Your restaurant is exceptional, and your grace under pressure is admirable. One by one, the other executives stood up, each mumbling apologies or making excuses. Walsh remained seated, his face now ashen. The expensive wine he'd been drinking seemed to have lost its effect. Your bill has been taken care of, Sarah said, surprising everyone. Consider it a lesson in humility, courtesy of Sweet Magnolia. However, her voice took on a firmer tone. I must ask you to leave my restaurant. While we welcome all guests who show basic respect, we reserve the right to refuse service to those who don't meet that simple standard. Walsh finally stood up, his legs unsteady. You'll be hearing from my lawyers, he threatened weakly. I look forward to it, Sarah replied calmly. I'm sure they'll be very interested in viewing the security footage of your behavior today, along with your attempts to threaten a legitimate business with false health code reports. As Walsh hurried toward the exit, the restaurant burst into applause. Sarah raised her hand for quiet, ever the professional. She looked around at her customers and staff, seeing pride and respect in their eyes. In that moment, she could almost feel her grandmother's hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently in approval. The lunch service wasn't over yet, and there were other customers to attend to. But something had definitely changed at Sweet Magnolia that day, something that went far beyond a simple revelation of ownership. After Walsh's hasty exit, Sarah didn't take time to celebrate. Instead, she did something that surprised everyone in the restaurant. She went back to serving tables. Still wearing her chef's coat, she moved from table to table, making sure every customer was taken care of, just as she had been doing before the incident. Miss Sarah, Lisa whispered, trying to take the water pitcher from her hands. Let us handle this. You should take a break after what just happened. Sarah shook her head, smiling gently. The lunch service isn't over, Lisa. Our customers still need us. She continued her rounds, refilling water glasses and checking on meals, her head held high. The restaurant buzzed with excited whispers. Customers who had witnessed the entire scene were already sharing the story on their phones. The young reporter from the Atlanta Business Journal approached Sarah's hostess stand, requesting an interview, but Sarah politely asked him to contact her office later. Right now, she had a restaurant to run. In the kitchen, her staff watched her with new admiration. Many of them had known she was the owner, of course, but seeing her handle Walsh's behavior with such grace had earned her an even deeper respect. Marcus, the line cook, gave her a quick salute when she came to pick up an order. Chef, he said, his voice full of emotion, my grandmother worked as a maid for 40 years. She faced people like that every day. She would have been proud to see what you did out there. Sarah squeezed his shoulder as she passed. Our grandmothers knew something important, Marcus. They knew that dignity isn't given to us by others. It's something we carry inside. Around 2 p.m., as the lunch rush was winding down, Angela, the blonde executive from Walsh's table, returned to the restaurant. She asked to speak with Sarah privately. In her office, Sarah listened as Angela explained that she was actually the senior VP of operations at Walsh's company. What happened today was unacceptable, Angela said firmly. I've already called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. We've had other complaints about Mr. Walsh's behavior before, but nothing this well documented. Sarah leaned back in her chair, thinking of her grandmother again. You know, she said slowly, when my grandmother started her catering business in the 1960s, she faced people like Mr. Walsh every day. But she never let them stop her from cooking with love, from serving with dignity, from building something meaningful. She stood up and walked to the wall of photographs, pointing to the old picture of her grandmother. She taught me that the best response to hatred isn't more hatred. It's excellence. It's proving them wrong not with words, but with actions. Angela nodded, looking at the photo. Your grandmother would be proud. And I want you to know that I've already contacted our HR department. Mr. Walsh's behavior today wasn't just morally wrong, it violated multiple company policies. Sarah returned to her desk and pulled out a business card. Thank you, Angela, but instead of focusing on Mr. Walsh, I'd like to discuss something else. She smiled warmly. I understand your company provides corporate lunches for its employees. Perhaps Sweet Magnolia could submit a catering proposal. Angela's eyes widened with surprise, then understanding. That would be perfect, actually. We've been looking for new vendors who align with our company's values of diversity and inclusion. As they discussed potential arrangements, Sarah's phone buzzed with messages. Local news outlets were requesting interviews. Social media was already picking up the story. Jessica Chen had sent a message announcing that she wanted to host her company's next board meeting at Sweet Magnolia. But Sarah's focus remained on the immediate tasks at hand. After Angela left, she changed back into her server's uniform and rejoined her staff for the dinner preparation. There would be time later for interviews and celebrations. Right now, there were meals to prepare, tables to set, and customers to serve, all with the same dignity and excellence her grandmother had taught her to maintain, no matter what challenges came her way. As she worked, Sarah smiled, thinking how sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's success served with a side of grace. The story of what happened at Sweet Magnolia spread through Atlanta like wildfire. By the next morning, local news stations were parked outside the restaurant, their vans sporting satellite dishes and eager reporters. Sarah's phone hadn't stopped buzzing with notifications since she woke up. The Atlanta Business Journal had already published their article, Restaurant Owners Grace Under Pressure: How Sarah Mitchell Turned Racism into a Teaching Moment. The story included quotes from several customers who had witnessed the incident, including Jessica Chen's powerful statement about character and leadership. I wasn't trying to make a statement, Sarah told her staff during their morning meeting. I was just being who my grandmother taught me to be. The employees gathered in the kitchen nodded, many of them having arrived early just to show their support. Lisa, who had watched the whole scene unfold, spoke up. Miss Sarah, you should see what's happening on social media. The video someone took has over 1 million views already. Indeed, hashtag Sweet Magnolia and hashtag Sarah Mitchell were trending on Twitter. People were sharing their own stories of facing discrimination in restaurants, both as customers and employees. But what made Sarah's story different was how she had handled it. Around 10 a.m., Sarah received an interesting email. It was from Walsh's company. The board of directors had called an emergency meeting the previous evening, and Richard Walsh had been placed on immediate administrative leave, pending an investigation. The email included a formal apology and a request to cater their next month's board meeting. But the most surprising news came from Angela, who called personally. You won't believe this, Sarah, she said excitedly. After yesterday's incident, our company's Diversity and Inclusion Committee reviewed our practices. They're implementing mandatory sensitivity training for all executives, and they want you to be a guest speaker. Sarah couldn't help but laugh at the irony. Her grandmother would have appreciated how things had turned out. The lunch service that day was unlike anything Sweet Magnolia had ever seen. The line stretched around the block. People waited patiently, many saying they had come not just for the famous food, but to show support. Sarah had to ask her staff to work extra shifts just to handle the crowd. Among the customers was an elderly black couple who had owned a local bakery for 40 years. They asked to speak with Sarah personally. We faced the same things in our day, the woman said, holding Sarah's hand. But we didn't have phones to record it, or social media to share our stories. You showed everyone what we'd known all along, that dignity and excellence are the best answers to ignorance. Jessica Chen dropped by in the afternoon, this time with her entire executive team. I hope you don't mind, she said with a smile, but I booked Sweet Magnolia for our next 3 corporate events. And I told all my business contacts about your catering service. Local business organizations began calling. They wanted Sarah to speak at their events about leadership and handling difficult situations. 3 different publishers reached out about a potential book deal. A famous cooking show invited her to be a guest judge. But what touched Sarah the most was a letter she received from a young black culinary student. I was ready to give up on my dream of owning a restaurant, the letter read. I was afraid of facing the same prejudices I've seen others face. But after seeing how you handled that situation, I know it's possible to succeed with grace. You showed me that we can be strong without losing our humanity. That evening, after the dinner rush had finally died down, Sarah sat in her office looking at her grandmother's picture. She thought about how one moment of standing up for herself with dignity had created such a powerful ripple effect. Her phone buzzed with another message. This time it was from the mayor's office. They wanted to present her with a Community Leadership Award. Sarah smiled, thinking how her grandmother had always said that good things come to those who stay true to themselves. "You were right, Grandma," she whispered to the photograph. "Sometimes the best recipe for change is equal parts dignity and determination, served with a generous helping of grace." The incident with Walsh had started as an ugly moment of discrimination, but it had transformed into something beautiful, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful response to hatred is simply showing everyone who you really are. 6 months after the incident with Richard Walsh, Sweet Magnolia had transformed into something even more special than before. The restaurant wasn't just a place to eat anymore, it had become a symbol of dignity and positive change in Atlanta's business community. Sarah sat in her expanded office, looking at the wall of photographs. Her grandmother's picture was still in the center, but now it was surrounded by new memories. Sarah receiving the Mayor's Community Leadership Award, speaking at business conferences, and mentoring young entrepreneurs. The latest addition was a group photo of Sweet Magnolia's first graduating class of intern chefs, all from underprivileged backgrounds. "Miss Sarah?" Lisa knocked on the office door. She wasn't just a hostess anymore. Sarah had promoted her to customer relations manager. "Your 3 o'clock is here for the mentorship program." Sarah smiled and stood up. After the incident, she had started a program called Cooking Up Dreams, which offered training and support to aspiring restaurateurs from minority communities. Today, she was meeting with a young woman who wanted to open an Ethiopian fusion restaurant. As she walked through the dining room, Sarah noticed how much had changed. The restaurant had expanded into the space next door, doubling its size. They now had a private dining area for corporate events, which was almost always booked. Jessica Chen's company had become a regular client, hosting weekly executive lunches. The kitchen staff had grown too. Marcus, the line cook who had supported her that day, was now the sous chef. He ran a weekly cooking class for local youth, teaching them not just about food, but about confidence and professionalism. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Angela, who had been promoted to CEO after Walsh's company underwent major changes. The mandatory sensitivity training program they had developed together was being adopted by other corporations across the city. "You changed more than just our company," Angela had written. "You changed how businesses in Atlanta think about leadership and dignity." As Sarah prepared for her mentorship meeting, she remembered something interesting that had happened last week. A familiar face had appeared at the restaurant, Richard Walsh's daughter. She had come to apologize for her father and to share that the incident had opened important conversations in their family. "Dad's not the same person he was that day," she had told Sarah. "Losing his job, seeing himself in those viral videos, it made him think hard about his behavior. He's been going to counseling, learning about his prejudices. He wanted to apologize himself, but he didn't think he had the right to show his face here again." Sarah had sent her back with a message. "Tell your father he's welcome to return to Sweet Magnolia when he's ready." Sometimes the best way to learn is to face our mistakes. The young woman waiting in the conference room reminded Sarah of herself 10 years ago, full of dreams but worried about the obstacles ahead. As they talked about business plans and kitchen layouts, Sarah shared not just her knowledge, but her experience. "There will be people who doubt you," she told the aspiring restaurateur, "who judge you before they know you. But remember, success isn't just about proving them wrong. It's about staying true to yourself and lifting others up along the way." That evening, after the dinner service, Sarah gathered her staff for their monthly meeting. Sweet Magnolia was about to launch something new, a scholarship program for culinary students from minority backgrounds. The fund had started with Sarah's speaking fees from various events, but had grown through donations from business leaders inspired by her story. "My grandmother used to say that a good meal can change someone's day," Sarah told her team. "But I've learned that a good example can change someone's life." As she looked around at her staff, diverse, dedicated, and proud of their work, Sarah felt grateful for everything that had happened, even the difficult moments. What had started as an ugly incident had bloomed into something beautiful, a legacy of change, opportunity, and hope. The last customer of the night, an elderly woman, stopped by the kitchen to compliment the chef. "You know," she said to Sarah, "I've been eating here for years, but the food tastes even better now. What's your secret?" Sarah thought about her grandmother's words about seasoning everything with love. "The ingredients are the same," she replied with a warm smile. "We just added an extra portion of dignity, a cup of determination, and a whole lot of community spirit."